I'm not exactly what you would call a Final Fantasy veteran, but I've played a couple and think I've at least earned some stripes to give my 2 cents on the series. I've played 7 Remake and Rebirth, 10, and 100% at 16. And like 3 hours of 15. Make sure I puff my chest out when I share that one. I really like a lot of what I see from the series, even ones I haven't played yet, and all of the ones I've played too. So what's the deal with Final Fantasy? What is it that grabs people in? Is it the stories, the characters and their designs or art style, the overall gameplay and experience? What is it about Final Fantasy that makes it so great, that makes it such a massive and popular franchise? This may be a bit of a flawed video from me, since I only have so much experience with the series, but I honestly feel enough passion and enjoyment from what I have experienced so far, and what I plan to experience in the future, that it drives me to want to talk about it a bit. But you let me know as well. Are you an old head and don't like where the series has gone? Are you newer like me? Share your thoughts, because I love to talk about these matters in the comments. Anyways, I often like to think back to what I found so appealing that made me first want to jump into the series. It could have been a bit of a feeling like being left out, because it seems like everyone has at least played one Final Fantasy, and like how it was this huge thing that you just had to play. When I was younger, my first ever attempt was on an emulator on my phone. I tried getting into the series with 6. I don't entirely remember what happened. I probably just couldn't get behind it because I don't remember much past the opening scenes. A bit later, I tried 13, and from what I hear, is that 13 is a relatively infamous part of the series, and that ended about the same. I don't recall much past the opening segments of the game. Later again, I heard about the announcements of 15, I saw ads and online hype, and I bought it. Once more, played the opening segments up to where you meet Cindy, and stopped. Years, and I mean years later, I'm browsing the PlayStation Store, free games of the month. Oh, Final Fantasy VII Remake. Why not grab it? It's free. Finally sat down and played it a few months later after remembering I grabbed it while it was free. I played the opening segment, got to the hub of Sector 7, and I kept going, and going, and going. This made me wonder, how come this is the one that got me? Were the prior attempts just a bad time? Did I not give them enough time to earn my full attention? Was this one of the ones that had a really appealing plot, or characters, or gameplay? I feel like you could argue any of those, and not even just for 7, because it isn't likely that that was a possible factor that made me want to try the others too. The franchise has always had very standout or interesting and unique characters, so what else is it? Maybe the gameplay of 13 didn't impress me, maybe 6 didn't appeal to me because it was too old school. It's really hard to pinpoint, but I think every Final Fantasy just has something that hooks you, which could be either the characters, the story, what style of gameplay it has, etc. Which is really good for a series in some ways, since there's almost always one game out there that seems like it's made for you, but depending on why that specific one interested you as opposed to the others could also be a problem. I often see older fans of the series having negative takes on the newer games, especially the remakes of 7, because maybe it seems more bloated with unnecessary things, or like they've lost the direction of certain things that the OG fans truly cared about and thought gave the game its impact and identity. Now, I get it as an early fan of certain different franchises, but I hate when they get asked for recommendations, recommend only old ones, and tell the people nothing new is worth playing. Because that's just stupid. If this is a new person to the series wanting recommendations, then they have the chance to like the newer ones. So I dislike when they have mindsets like that to where it almost seems gatekeepy and just write off anything that isn't their carbon copy of the old formula they grew to love. But anyways, I get that they feel like the series isn't made for them anymore or it's a shadow of its former self, but why is that? Is it because they feel they're altering the original story too much of the remakes? Are they upset with the passing of the turn-based combat or some other factors? Those first two are most certainly bigger issues, because if they got into Final Fantasy for the gameplay, combat more so than the story, then the series moving away from that style will certainly affect their opinion on the series and newer games. Is it necessarily a bad thing for the series to change things up though? It can be, but it can also be a good thing. So take Resident Evil. Many people were saying they couldn't get into the series because of the slower tank controls and fixed camera angles that the franchise had for so long. So by RE4, they gave it the over-the-shoulder treatment, a less scary horror, and more action-y playstyle and settings. and they had themselves a massive hit. Then unfortunately leaned too heavy into that other direction and got themselves in trouble. But then by RE7 adjusted again, this time to first person, and leaned hyper heavy into the survival horror direction and shot themselves right back up in popularity. Now this is a great example of it working, but has it worked for Final Fantasy, knowing many old fans aren't too impressed with the more modern titles and remakes? I would still argue yes, but even with how I mentioned there's always a game for someone, that also comes with a great chance that many other entries won't be for that someone. Like some people may love the time period and atmosphere of 12, but not 15 because they're drastically different. Same for the playstyle or genre. I'm a big fan of action RPGs and hack and slashes, but I can also appreciate a good turn-based game. So the overall gameplay style won't hold great impact, at least for me and those who share a similar interest. However, I can still see when the series was cemented in it for 10 plus games, people who were there very early on may feel like it's harder to recognize the series nowadays. Especially when they see a remake of one of their all-time favorites, or one of the most popular entries in the series, gets a huge graphic and gameplay overhaul, as well as different twists to the story, making it different from the original material. I can understand and even sympathize with that. I still don't think that means it's sensical to cast aside the newer games though. I look at it like this. Some people didn't like Dark Souls 2 despite it being a fairly decent experience. However, it was looked at the most negatively out of any Souls game due to things like quantity over quality bosses, odd movement mechanics, and largely because it didn't seem quite as similar to 1 and 3. But many people, myself included, look at it as if it didn't have Dark Souls tagged on its name, a lot more people would actually be praising the game and saying it was a solid experience. Which goes along with what I have to say for newer Final Fantasy games. They are still great experiences. I'd even say phenomenal for some. And I'm sure if they weren't branded as Final Fantasy games, a lot of these older fans not enjoying newer entries could admit that. They're still solid experiences worth playing, but because they aren't a traditional turn-based format, yet have the audacity to call themselves a Final Fantasy game, now we should just disregard them and say they're not worth playing if you want to play Final Fantasy? Like, sorry, not sorry, that's just dumb. I didn't want this to turn into too much of a community rant, but I felt that I needed to say that spiel. Like, I get the frustrations and such, but I don't think it justifies telling people that are interested in the series and are like, oh, hey, what one should I play, blah, blah, blah. Oh, the new ones aren't worth playing, they aren't true Final Fantasy. You can argue a thing like core gameplay mechanics make a series, but I don't think that's often the case, certainly not here for Final Fantasy. It's a culmination of all these things, the gameplay, characters, environment, storytelling, setting, art style, blah, blah, blah. Alright, anyways. Isn't that part of it too, though? It's such a great series because people feel passionate about it that they'd have arguments like those, and I'd have opinions like mine. Although that isn't how I intended for it to be, I did get out most of what I thought on why the series is great, just a bit more than I had hoped. Ended up being in a slightly frustrated rant. But I do just want to add some slight praise in certain areas. Like, I always think the art style and settings for these games are amazing, well done. Especially 16, I just couldn't get over how nice places like Oriflamme and Twinside looked, and just the chivalrous time period it took place in, all that sort of the knights and the similar kind of people saying, oh, it's kind of like Game of Thrones, blah, blah, blah. So if you like that series, you'd probably like the game. I did. And it also just had such a gripping story from beginning to end, which again, people are like, oh, it's kind of like a Game of Thrones clone. I mean, I see similarities, but I don't think it's that similar. Maybe that's just me, I don't know. And back to art quickly, even the old ones, when you would see the art made by guys like Yoshitaka Amano, that stuff makes you want to jump into these worlds and see what they're all about and go on the adventure they've got planned for you. When it's pleasing to the eye, sometimes that's enough to get many people on board. I've also seen people saying they'd want to see a game made where most of its art direction actually fits that older style from those artists of early games. I think you'd probably get something along the lines of Octopath Traveler. Not quite that, but similar, and I still can't help but wonder how it would turn out. Octopath is always a fun reminder of where technology is nowadays, and that if certain series stuck with their pixel art style, how would the games look? Like Final Fantasy and even Pokemon. Though I guess that's a bit of a different topic. Lastly, I think they did their turn-based quite well, at least from what I played of it, which is pretty much just 10 so far. And then I also think the way you control your party and the more action-oriented gameplay of the 7 remakes is incredible. Same as the more Devil May Cry style 16 had. They all felt great and enjoyable their own ways, you know, and still just very well done and fluid. So you let me know what you think. Did I make some good points? Did I share any thoughts with you? Are you a fan of the older ones, the older days, and have some different points that I ought to know? I'd love to hear it, so I really encourage your thoughts down below. All the same, I appreciate you hanging out for a bit, and hopefully we'll meet again sometime.